Libby Taylor adjusted the small holographic recorder with careful hands. Her fingers were steady, but her heart wasn't. The soft hum of artificial sunlight in the modified Situation Room of the White House pulsed in the background, almost like a second heartbeat. She leaned forward, brushing a few strands of hair from her face, and hit record. "This is Libby Taylor," she said, her voice low but clear, "and this might be my last night on Earth." She was completely cut off from the reality of the world outside. She could only imagine what that must sound like. Sirens rising and falling in the distance, and the wind carrying the scent of ionized air. "I'm not a soldier," she continued, speaking directly into the lens. "I'm not a scientist. I'm just a girl who likes books, vintage video games, and asking questions people don't want to answer. My mom says that makes me a journalist." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, I guess I'm recording this for whoever finds it. After, if there's an after." A breath. A long, uncertain pause. "The Korrith gave us until midnight to surrender. They said humanity isn't compatible with order, their order. That we're too violent, too disobedient, too unpredictable." Her mouth tightened into something between a smile and a grimace. "And we said, no." She shifted in her seat and turned slightly, as if expecting someone. "Everyone says the war started 2 years ago in 2038, she said softly. "But my mom says that's not true. I think she understands this better than anyone else, and she says if you really want to understand what's happening now, you have to go back." Libby looked off screen. "Mom? When did this all really begin?" There was a pause, then a woman's voice replied, steady, worn, but sure. "For me, there is no doubt. It started the day I met your Uncle Danny." Libby leaned back as her mother stepped into frame. Lisa Taylor, once Lisa Price, had eyes that had seen too much but still held something strong beneath. Her arms crossed over her chest as she stood behind her daughter. "You mean, when you were in high school?" Libby asked. Lisa nodded. "Yeah," she said, her voice softening with memory. "I thought I was just falling in love with your dad, and I definitely was. But Daniel, he was the unexpected connection that would help reshape my entire understanding of love, communication, and my own worth. He wasn't just Luke's little brother. He, in many ways, was my first friend." The hollow shimmered for a moment. As Libby focuses in on her mother, but she doesn't see the 30-year-old Asian American woman anymore. She is engrossed in the story now. Sunlight, a quiet street, the crack of basketballs, the buzz of cicadas, a teenage boy running toward a porch where a silent little boy waited, and somewhere the faint echo of a Starship theme song in the background. Everything had a beginning, and this was theirs.
The Taylor Farm, 2026.
The Taylor farm sat at the edge of a long dirt road, framed by cotton fields and the kind of silence that could only come from being miles from town. Morning sun poured over the roof of the century-old farmhouse, warming the red tin like it was a blessing. Inside, the smell of bacon, grits, and biscuits mingled with the low murmur of a gospel station, crackling from an old radio near the kitchen window. Caroline Taylor moved like a woman born for ritual. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, pressed the corners of her mouth together, and glanced toward the back porch where her youngest son sat, rocking slowly, his bare feet dangling above the wood slats. "Thomas!" she called. "He's outside again! No shoes! It's wet!" Thomas didn't answer right away. He was already halfway across the yard, a tall man with shoulders bowed not from age, but from years of tilling soil that rarely gave back what it took. He didn't speak as he reached the boy, just knelt and tapped Daniel's arm gently, offering a pair of sneakers. Daniel didn't look at him. His eyes tracked something invisible, just a shadow dancing across the fields, or maybe nothing at all. He rocked once, twice, then still. "I'll bring him in," Thomas said, not needing to be told. The Taylors were an African-American family whose roots ran deep through the clay soil of Montgomery County, Alabama, a land scarred by history, but still pulsing with quiet strength. Thomas Taylor was a second-generation farmer, the son of a man who'd scraped together enough dignity and credit to buy a stretch of land once worked by their ancestors under far different terms. The farm wasn't large, but it was theirs, and Thomas tended it with the reverence of someone who knew what it had cost to hold on to. He moved through the rows of cotton and sweet corn with a quiet authority, a man who understood that on this land, freedom was something you kept by showing up for it every day. Inside the farmhouse, Caroline placed 4 plates on the table out of habit. Daniel didn't eat breakfast at the table. He didn't eat with anyone. But she still set the plate, still filled his glass with juice he wouldn't drink. Some days she couldn't stop herself. Others, she pretended she was doing it for Luke. Luke, their firstborn, their golden boy, was already off to school in Montgomery, senior year, head of his ROTC unit, already getting attention from recruiters. Luke understood Daniel in the way a brother should, with a protective streak that could turn violent if someone looked at the boy wrong. But even Luke had stopped trying to talk to him. Caroline pressed her palms together as the family sat, or rather, as she and Thomas sat, and Daniel stood nearby, hovering like a ghost beside the wall. She bowed her head. Lord, we thank you for this food, for the labor that brought it to the table, and for this family. Even when we don't understand your ways, we trust your will. Amen. Daniel didn't speak, didn't move. Thomas reached for his fork. He sat outside for near an hour this morning, he said quietly. Didn't blink once. Caroline's lips thinned. He's been doing that more lately. Thomas said nothing. What was there to say? Daniel was 7, and still, not a word. Barely a sound. The boy turned suddenly and walked out of the room. Caroline watched him go, her face unreadable. Then, softly, "You think he knows we love him?" Thomas looked at her, then away. "I reckon he knows. Just ain't got a way to show it back." Outside, Daniel sat on the porch again, the sun cresting higher, casting long shadows that moved like slow hands across the cotton rows. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. But something in him listened. And somewhere far off, though no one in the house knew it yet, something had started listening back.
The next morning,
Luke Taylor kicked open the screen door, a basketball under one arm and his phone glowing with unanswered texts. He was 17 and all swagger, long legs, broad shoulders, and a confidence that hadn't yet been humbled by anything more serious than a midterm or a missed dunk. "Ma," Luke called out, his voice a blend of teenage exasperation and practiced charm. "I told you, I've got plans today." His words hung in the air, weighted with the casual entitlement of a high school senior who believed the world revolved around his schedule, each syllable carrying the faint undertone of restrained frustration. Caroline didn't look up from the laundry she was folding at the kitchen table. "You always have plans, Luke." "I'm meeting the guys at the court by 11. Lisa's coming too. I've been trying to make this work with her and look, you know she's not easy." Carolyn raised an eyebrow. "You're not saying anything I didn't already know." Luke groaned and dropped the ball onto the linoleum. "Then why can't someone else watch him?" "Because your father's working the south field, and I've got choir practice and 2 casseroles to deliver before noon. Unless you can convince the Lord to push Sunday back a day, I'm out of options." Luke leaned against the counter, jaw tight. "He doesn't even talk. What am I supposed to do with him?" Caroline finally met his eyes. "You love him." Luke looked away. "You don't have to understand him," she added gently. "You just have to show up." A minute passed. Luke exhaled hard through his nose. "Fine." Daniel didn't resist when Luke buckled him into the passenger seat of his old Ford truck. He didn't speak, didn't fidget, didn't look out the window. He just sat, hands in his lap, watching the road blur by as they drove into town. Luke glanced over. "We'll grab a Coke or something before we hit the court. You good with that?" Silence. Luke swallowed a sigh. Right. Dumb question.
At the basketball court,
It was supposed to be a normal Saturday. Sun, sweat, trash talk, and maybe, if he was lucky, a long moment alone with the prettiest girl in school. But Luke Taylor had a little brother, and Daniel didn't do normal. But today for Lisa Price, that wouldn't just be good, it would be extraordinary. Lisa was already sitting on the bleachers when Luke arrived, her worn backpack beside her and a paperback novel splayed open across her knees. At 17, she carried herself like someone used to being watched but tired of being seen. Pretty in the kind of way that made boys reckless and girls suspicious. She was used to attention, but rarely trust. Her dark hair fell in waves around her face, half tucked behind one ear, and her eyes scanned the court like she was expecting something to go wrong. As an orphan, Lisa had been in more homes than birthdays, and though she laughed easily, it never quite reached the places that still hurt. But here, in the heat of a Saturday morning with the sharp bark of sneakers on pavement, she was just a girl trying to hold on to something good. Maybe Luke. Maybe not. She hadn't decided yet. Luke climbed out of the car with an exaggerated sigh and a bounce of his basketball against the ground. Then Luke spotted Lisa, and for a moment he forgot about all of his frustrations. Lisa then spotted him and the surprise passenger he had in tow. For Lisa, it was a blessing and a curse. Perhaps the choice she was debating could wait. She couldn't break up with Luke in front of his kid brother. Lisa's brow furrowed as Luke approached, a smaller, quiet boy trailing beside him. She'd seen Daniel before, of course, a silent shadow at football games or school events. But this was different. Luke had brought him here. "Luke, what's this?" Lisa asked, her voice a low hum of surprise as she gestured toward Daniel. "I thought it was just going to be us after the game." Luke ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic he only displayed when Lisa was involved. "Ma said I had to bring him. Farm's a bust today. Dad's in the South Fields. Nobody else." He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both annoyance and a forced casualness. "He's quiet." Daniel, oblivious to their conversation, wandered toward the edge of the court, his gaze fixed on the weathered asphalt, his fingers tracing invisible patterns. Lisa watched him, a strange curiosity stirring within her. She had never paid much attention to the quiet boy, the one who always seemed lost in his own world. But now, something about his stillness, his complete detachment from the boisterous energy of the park, drew her in. Lisa glanced at him. "It's okay, Luke." Her voice was softer than usual. "I don't mind." He gave her a tired smile. "Thanks. I just didn't expect my parents to drop him on me last minute." Lisa turned her gaze toward Daniel, her delicate features softening with curiosity. His small frame seemed almost fragile, dressed in clothes that hung loosely, his wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew. "I never asked before, but he doesn't talk at all?" Luke shook his head, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a resigned sigh. "Doesn't talk, like ever, not even to Mom." His voice carried a mixture of frustration and protective concern. Lisa crouched down next to Daniel, her movement fluid and gentle. She realized that during all the times she had seen him at school events and family gatherings, she had never truly attempted to connect with him. Her shadow fell across his small form as she leaned in, her voice soft and tentative. "Hey there," she said softly, a smile warming her voice. "Thanks for joining us today." No response. So Luke answered for him. "He's 7, and Mom jokes that he won't talk until he meets a starship captain from one of those old TV shows." Luke said with a hint of exasperation. Lisa leaned in, her voice soft and playful. "Well, then consider me Captain Lisa of the USS Curiosity. I love science fiction, spicy food that makes you sweat, and I'm spectacularly bad at gym class. Permission to engage in conversation, Ensign Daniel?" Still nothing. She looked over her shoulder at Luke, unsure. "He's smart," Luke said, watching them from the bottom of the steps. "Just quiet." A sharp, piercing whistle sliced through the park's ambient noise. Across the sun-drenched basketball court, one of Luke's friends, a lanky teenager in a faded Carver High jersey, was waving energetically, his arm cutting wide arcs through the air. Luke glanced over, his expression a mixture of mild irritation and resigned obligation. He gave Lisa an apologetic look, his shoulders dropping slightly in a gesture that spoke more than words. "I'll just be over there," he said, his voice a blend of teenage distraction and brotherly obligation. The words hung in the air, light as summer dust, but weighted with an unspoken tension. She nodded, her delicate fingers brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear in a gesture both unconscious and graceful. "Go," she said softly, her eyes flickering between Luke and Daniel. "We'll be fine." Lisa wasn't sure why she said that. She definitely wasn't fine. This wasn't the way she thought this day would go. But then again, that might not be a bad thing. She was seriously considering breaking things off with Luke. She had been rehearsing it in her head. He was a great guy, but she was kidding herself. She was never going to make this work. She would find a way to mess it up, sooner rather than later. She had already cheated on him twice. It was only a matter of time before he found out. It's not that she wanted to. She liked Luke a lot. But her insecurity, her demons, her belief that the only thing she ever had to offer anyone was her body. It always won out in the end. She had tried everything, therapy, meds, but nothing worked. Nothing erased her past. The pain of being abandoned by her parents because they wanted a boy. The disconnect from living in group homes. There had only been one constant, one thing she could count on. Boys thought she was pretty, and that currency was all that she had. It was what she had survived on for years. She didn't sell herself for money, but attention, affection, kindness. She traded herself for those things before she even knew what she was doing. But now that she knew, she couldn't stop, no matter how much she tried. So by ending things now, she was going to spare him that pain. But now that plan was off the table, at least for today. What the hell? At least the kid was quiet, she thought to herself. The moment Luke jogged off, the world felt quieter. Lisa sat on the steps a few feet from Daniel. She folded her arms across her knees and let out a slow sigh. "Okay, Lisa," she whispered. "Just talk like normal." Lisa shifted uncomfortably on the bench beside Daniel, folding her arms against the sudden breeze. He hadn't moved. Not when Luke walked away, not when the shouts from the court echoed across the park. He was like a statue, small, sun-warmed, and distant. She leaned back and sighed. "God, this is awkward." Daniel blinked. Lisa glanced over. Still no response. Just those deep, too old eyes tracking something she couldn't see. She tried again. "I didn't mean that in a bad way. I'm not great at this. People stuff. Small talk. Quiet kids." Nothing. She reached into her well-worn backpack, the fabric faded and patched in places, and pulled out a crumpled paperback. The book was a testament to her love of reading. Its spine cracked, pages yellowed and folded at odd angles, bearing the marks of countless journeys in her bag. Star Trek. The Kobayashi Maru, a novel she'd read so many times the characters felt like old friends. With Luke occupied and Daniel seemingly lost in his own world, she figured she might as well dive back into her favorite science fiction story. "Yeah, I know," she muttered to herself, a self-deprecating smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Total nerd alert. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the pages, finding a familiar passage. Almost unconsciously, she began to read aloud, her voice low and measured, more to break the silence than with any expectation of an audience. "There's no such thing as a no-win scenario," Kirk said, leveling his gaze at the cadet. A beat passed. Silence hung in the air. Then another, and then... "You don't believe that," said a voice. Lisa froze. Her pulse spiked, a sudden electricity running through her veins. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she turned toward Daniel. He was staring at her, calm, focused. His deep brown eyes held an intensity that seemed to pierce right through her. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He tilted his head as if the words were nothing special. "You don't believe it. That there's no such thing as a no-win scenario." Her mouth opened, then closed, a mix of shock and bewilderment flickering across her face. How did you—" "People who don't like Vulcans are easy to read," Daniel said matter-of-factly, his eyes never wavering from her, holding an intensity that belied his 7 years. Lisa stammered, her voice catching. "How did you know?" "You were frowning when you read Spock's lines," he said simply, as if decoding human emotion was as natural as breathing. Lisa stood abruptly, then sat back down, her hands trembling slightly, a physical manifestation of her internal disorientation. "You read him like you don't like him," Daniel continued softly, his observation cutting through the awkward silence. "You pause when he talks. You don't do that with Kirk." Her mouth opened, then closed again like a fish gasping for air. You talk?" Daniel tilted his head, a gesture both childlike and unnervingly precise. "You didn't ask me not to." Lisa blinked, processing. "Luke said you were nonverbal." "They don't ask the right questions," Daniel responded. "And when they talk, they aren't listening. You do." Lisa wasn't sure what to say to that. She stared at him for a moment, stunned, then slowly broke into a smile. Not her usual performative grin, but a genuine expression of wonder. This smile had depth, authenticity, weight. "Well," she said, leaning back and letting out a soft, disbelieving laugh that echoed with a mixture of surprise and genuine amusement. "Now I feel like an idiot." Daniel shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling with a precision that belied his young age. "Lots of people do." Lisa burst out laughing, the sound bright and unexpected. "So you like Star Trek?" "Of course," Daniel said, his gaze steady and intense, brown eyes focusing on her with an almost scholarly concentration. "Yeah," she said, her smile softening. "It's a little nerdy, but I love it. Kirk's my favorite, but Data, he is the one I'd want as a friend." A pause. "He's the most human," Daniel said, his voice steady, a hint of maturity beyond his years. "But if you like Kirk, why would you want to be friends with Data?" "Because," she said, her voice low, "sometimes I feel like I don't belong anywhere. Data does, but he doesn't. And he's okay with that." Daniel nodded. "Anything else you willing to share about yourself?" Lisa asked, her eyebrow arched with playful curiosity, sunlight catching the mischievous glint in her eyes. "Depends on who is asking," Daniel replied, his small frame rigid with calculated precision, his brown eyes analyzing her with an intensity that belied his 7 years. "Okay, smartass, let's test this out. Favorite food?" "Grapes, frozen. They provide a perfect balance of texture and temperature variation," he stated clinically, his fingers unconsciously tracing an invisible mathematical equation in the air. "Gross. Favorite show?" "The Next Generation, but only the later seasons," Daniel responded, his voice a blend of academic critique and childlike enthusiasm. Lisa grinned, clearly delighted by his precise language. "Good answer. Least favorite sound?" "Vacuum cleaners. They cause unnecessary auditory stress," he declared, his glasses sliding slightly down his narrow nose. She nodded, genuinely impressed. "Same. Who knew?" "You do. At least you do now," Daniel said, his voice suddenly firm. "Because you are a great listener." A momentary silence hung between them, weighted with unspoken potential. Lisa tilted her head, her dark hair catching the sunlight like a cascade of liquid obsidian, her eyes distant with a sudden, wistful thought. "I've always wanted to feed the ducks," she mused, her voice soft and tinged with a hint of childhood longing. "There's this little pond right across the street in Oak Park, but Luke never wants to go. Says it's boring." "I'll go," Daniel said, his tone matter-of-fact and unwavering. Lisa blinked, surprise flickering across her features like a sudden breeze. "Yeah?" In one fluid, deliberate motion, he stood, his small frame surprisingly steady, already moving toward the sidewalk with a quiet determination. She scrambled up behind him, a burst of delighted, disbelieving laughter escaping her lips. "Well, all right then," she said, her voice dancing with unexpected joy. They walked side by side in easy silence. Lisa watched him from the corner of her eye, taking in how different he was from Luke, not louder or flashier, just quieter in a way that made everything he said feel intentional, like he saw more than he let on. At the pond, they sat at the edge and tossed bits of cracker into the water. Ducks waddled over in slow, bobbing herds. Lisa laughed as one nearly tripped over its own feet. "You'd think they'd have figured out bread by now." Daniel threw a crumb, carefully watching the ripples. "They like the noise." Lisa glanced over. "What noise?" "The splash," he said, quieter. "It makes them come closer." They sat in silence again, but it didn't feel awkward this time. It felt peaceful. Lisa looked down at her hands, then at Daniel. He wasn't like other kids. Or maybe he was, and she'd just never really listened before. "You're a lot cooler than your brother said you were," she teased gently. Daniel didn't look at her. "Luke's okay too." Lisa smiled. "He is." She picked up another cracker and paused. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been trying to get him to come feed ducks with me for weeks. He always says it's boring." Daniel leaned forward a little. "It's not boring, as long as you aren't alone." "No," she said, watching the way his eyes followed the ripples. "It's not." There was something about the way he noticed things, quiet things, that made Lisa feel settled. Like she didn't have to perform, like she didn't have to flirt or be funny or keep his attention by being pretty. He was just here, and he wanted her to be here too. Lisa smiled softly and nudged him with her shoulder. "You should give your big brother some lessons. He doesn't know how to keep a girl entertained." Daniel blinked up at her. "He must do okay. You all keep coming back." Lisa laughed. It was the bluntness that only came from an autistic child who just didn't know any better. But then he spoke again. "But you are the first one I want to come back. Will I ever see you again? Like this?" Lisa's breath hitched. She met his earnest gaze, the question hanging in the air between them, innocent yet profound. "You know what, Daniel?" she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again."